Story 1, Cinderella. Once upon a time in a land far away, there lived a young girl named Cinderella. She was known for her kindness and grace, but her life was far from glamorous. After her mother's death, her father remarried, bringing her a wicked stepmother and two equally wicked stepsisters into her life. They treated her as a servant in her own home, forcing her to do all the household chores while they enjoyed the comforts of their lives. One day, an invitation arrived at their doorstep. It was an invitation to the royal ball, a grand event hosted by the prince himself. Cinderella's heart fluttered with excitement, and she longed to attend. However, her wicked stepmother and stepsisters were quick to quash her hopes, declaring that she was not allowed to go. They tore apart her homemade dress and left for the ball without her, leaving Cinderella in tears. As she sobbed in the garden, a beautiful, otherworldly figure appeared before her. It was her fairy godmother. With a wave of her wand, she transformed Cinderella's tattered rags into a magnificent ball gown, and her old, worn shoes into glass slippers. Cinderella's pumpkin was turned into a dazzling carriage, and even the mice became horses to pull it. Her fairy godmother cautioned her to return home by midnight, as the magic would only last until then. Cinderella arrived at the royal ball, where she captivated everyone, including the prince. They danced, and she felt like she was living a dream. But as the clock struck midnight, she remembered her fairy godmother's warning and fled from the palace. In her haste, she left one of her glass slippers behind. The next day, the prince, desperate to find the owner of the glass slipper, sent his messengers throughout the kingdom. When they arrived at Cinderella's home, her wicked stepsisters tried to fit into the slipper, but it was too small for them. Cinderella tried it on, and it fit perfectly. The prince recognized her, and they were married in a grand ceremony. Cinderella and the prince lived happily ever after, and her wicked stepmother and stepsisters received the punishment they deserved for their cruelty. And so, the tale of Cinderella teaches us that kindness and goodness prevail in the end. Story 2, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In a land where magic and enchantments were not uncommon, there lived a beautiful princess named Snow White. She had skin as white as snow, lips as red as roses, and hair as black as ebony. But her life took a dark turn when her mother, the queen, passed away, leaving her father, the king, heartbroken. Shortly after, the king married a beautiful but wicked woman who was obsessed with her own beauty. This woman, Snow White's stepmother, was also a powerful sorceress. She possessed a magical mirror, which she would consult every day, asking, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" The mirror, not daring to lie, always replied that Snow White was the fairest. The stepmother's jealousy grew, and she plotted to get rid of Snow White. She ordered a huntsman to take Snow White deep into the forest and kill her. But the huntsman, unable to carry out such a cruel deed, allowed Snow White to escape. Lost and frightened in the dark forest, Snow White stumbled upon a small cottage that belonged to 7 dwarfs. The dwarfs were kind-hearted and allowed her to stay with them. She kept house for them, and they protected her. Back at the castle, the wicked queen discovered that Snow White was still alive and set out to finish the task herself. She used her dark magic to transform herself into an old hag and, with a poisoned apple, tricked Snow White into taking a bite. Snow White fell into a deep, death-like slumber. The dwarfs, finding her, placed her in a glass coffin. As time passed, a prince from a nearby kingdom, enchanted by her beauty, discovered the glass coffin in the forest. He kissed Snow White, and his love broke the evil spell. Snow White awoke, and the two of them rejoiced. They were married in a grand ceremony, and the wicked stepmother received her just punishment. Snow White and the prince ruled their kingdom with kindness and wisdom, and they lived happily ever after. Story 3, Little Red Riding Hood. In a small village nestled near the edge of a dense forest, there lived a sweet little girl known to everyone as Little Red Riding Hood. She earned this name because she always wore a vibrant red hood given to her by her grandmother. One day, Little Red Riding Hood's mother asked her to deliver some food and a special gift to her sick grandmother, who lived in a little cottage deep within the dark and mysterious forest. Her mother, worried about her safety, gave her strict instructions to stay on the path and not to speak to strangers. Little Red Riding Hood promised to obey her mother's warnings and set off on her journey, holding a basket of freshly baked goodies and her grandmother's gift. She followed the familiar path into the woods, the early morning sun dappling the path with light. As she ventured deeper into the forest, she became aware that she was not alone. A sly wolf with gleaming eyes approached her and inquired about her destination. Little Red Riding Hood, a curious and talkative girl, innocently revealed her plans to visit her grandmother. The wolf, with wicked intentions, decided to trick Little Red Riding Hood and reach her grandmother's house first. He took a shortcut through the woods and arrived at the cottage ahead of the young girl. Upon reaching her grandmother's cottage, the wolf knocked gently on the door, imitating Little Red Riding Hood's voice. "Who is it?" asked the grandmother from her bed. "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood. I've brought you some food and a gift," replied the wolf in a high-pitched voice. Without suspecting a thing, the grandmother welcomed the wolf inside. As he entered, he devoured the poor old lady and took her place in her bed, waiting for Little Red Riding Hood to arrive. When Little Red Riding Hood finally reached her grandmother's house, she was surprised to find the door ajar. She entered the cottage and saw her grandmother lying in bed. However, the room seemed dim, and the old lady's face was obscured. "Grandmother, what big ears you have!" Little Red Riding Hood exclaimed. "All the better to hear you with, my dear," replied the wolf, mimicking the grandmother's voice. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have!" Little Red Riding Hood continued. "All the better to see you with, my dear," answered the wolf, his eyes gleaming. "Grandmother, what big teeth you have!" Little Red Riding Hood said, growing more alarmed. "All the better to eat you with," cried the wolf, leaping from the bed. Little Red Riding Hood screamed as the wolf lunged at her. The noise attracted a nearby woodsman, who rushed to the cottage and heard her cries for help. He burst into the room and, with his trusty axe, managed to cut open the wolf's belly, rescuing Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. From that day on, Little Red Riding Hood learned a valuable lesson about talking to strangers and straying from the path. She promised to be more careful on her future journeys, and she and her grandmother lived in peace, knowing they were watched over by the kind-hearted woodsman. Story 4: Beauty and the Beast. In a land where the past and present blended seamlessly, there lived a kind and intelligent young woman named Belle. She was known for her beauty, but what truly set her apart was her love for books and her inquisitive nature. Belle lived in a small village with her father, Maurice, who was an inventor. One day, Maurice set off on a journey to a nearby town to showcase his inventions. On his way home, he got lost in the dense forest and found himself at the entrance of a mysterious castle. Seeking shelter, he entered the castle and discovered that it was inhabited by enchanted objects and, more importantly, a terrifying beast. The beast, originally a handsome prince, had been cursed by an enchantress for his arrogance and selfishness. She transformed him into a monstrous creature and the castle's inhabitants into household items. The enchantress's curse could only be broken if the beast could learn to love and be loved in return. Maurice's intrusion angered the beast, who locked him away in a dungeon. Belle, worried about her father, set out to find him. She followed his trail into the forest and arrived at the castle. Belle offered to take her father's place as the beast's prisoner to secure his release. The beast agreed to the exchange, and Maurice was allowed to return home. However, Belle was now a prisoner in the castle, where her only companions were the enchanted objects. Over time, Belle and the beast formed an unlikely friendship. He gradually revealed his kinder side, and she saw the loneliness he felt. They read books, talked, and shared stories. Belle soon realized that there was more to the beast than his frightening exterior. Back in the village, a handsome suitor named Gaston was pursuing Belle. He was handsome but also arrogant and selfish, and he believed that he was entitled to Belle's love. He hatched a plan to have Maurice committed to an asylum if Belle did not marry him. Meanwhile, Belle's stay in the castle was beginning to change the beast. He started to learn about love, kindness, and compassion, thanks to Belle's presence. One winter's night, Belle saw a magical mirror that allowed her to see her father in distress. The beast, understanding her love for her father, allowed her to go to him, even if it meant breaking the curse. Belle returned to the village to care for her father. Gaston's plan to have Maurice committed failed, but Gaston was not willing to give up on winning Belle. He gathered the villagers and stirred up their fears of the beast, convincing them to march to the castle and kill him. The mob descended on the castle, and a battle ensued. Gaston ultimately met his downfall, falling from the castle to his demise. The enchantress's rose, which symbolized the beast's curse, was wilting, and it seemed that all was lost. Belle returned to the castle just in time to confess her love for the beast. She told him that she cared for him, regardless of his appearance. Her love was the key to breaking the curse. At that moment, the beast transformed back into the handsome prince he once was, and the enchanted objects turned back into human beings. Belle and the prince were married in a grand ceremony, and they ruled their kingdom with kindness and wisdom. The castle's inhabitants were grateful for Belle's kindness, and they all lived happily ever after.